Norfolk. You might think, I know I've had various stages in my pathway to where I work and live now, to thinking, oh, I'm not as important as, or oh, if Michael's here, then he'll say it for us. Co-production, like inclusion, is everybody's business. So any contribution is valued, and wherever we are, we're at the point in our own journey to understanding co-production. We've had the big wow sessions with Jane and with Amy in the last 2 weeks, or last 2 sessions. And I think they're the kind of the things that make you feel co-production. The harder bit now is the how to. So I just thought it'd be really helpful to check in with you about what you think about what we've done so far, and what you hope in our final 2 sessions together might expedite or give us in Norfolk to take this forward. Because all of those visions are brilliant, but now we've got to harness them and make them happen on the ground. So any reflections, have a shout out, put your hand up, or put something in the box if you're a bit more shy than I am. You can see some people are putting their cameras on. So Sam, I've just spotted you. I'd love to hear from you, or Melanie, who's smiling at me, or Steve, who's not looking away, or Cheryl, or Alison.
I'm happy to say something. I was having a look through the document that was forwarded through earlier. I was really interested to have a quick read through that before we started. And I'm very interested in how we measure the impact on the child of what we're doing, and how we include their voice as well, especially children with, profound and multiple disabilities. How do we genuinely include their voice in what we're doing?
Brilliant. And I think you've read my mind, Alison, because next week we wanted to begin to draw things together through some, I suppose, thinking about where the leadership in Norfolk will be taking this. And when I say leadership, I always mean parents and young people as well, but also thinking about good conversations and some of the person-centered approaches. So you probably know about decision-making contributions, but there are some tools that I wanted to bring along next week just to refresh ourselves, because we've gone big on the ideas, and then we come back to what's it like being a young person in Norfolk. And I'm pre-verbal, and people think I can't make choices or express preferences. So we've got to think about all of our young folk, all of our children, and our parents and carers. Thank you. Anyone else?
Can I'll just quickly say something, if I'm honest, Pat? It's not something major. It's just that my about what is about the next part of the journey, really. One is about what are the main principles of co-production that we are taking forward as a system in Norfolk, and also what is it and how do we make sure we're doing it, and so how do we quality assure our co-production work going forward? Because actually, how do we know we are doing it if we have not got something to be clear what we're hanging it on? So yeah, having a clear framework really about what we're doing moving forward, to make sure we've got something to be going back to check that we're still on that same journey and that track, to be sure that we are co-producing things, and also be clear what is co-production and what are the things we're consulting with or engaging with, because actually they're very different things. So it's about that clarity, I think, of the system.
Yeah, well, that's really helpful, Mark, because I always think individual, service, strategic. There's 3 kind of elements of co-production. So the individual is, what are those person-centered approaches like? What are our tools, and what do we do routinely? And in the pledges, there is a commitment to person-centered approaches. So then I think alongside that, there's that strategic. So do we use the pledges and start to monitor them more closely? Or do we use something like this, the quality indicators, as standards that we work across? Do we have co-production week every year? So we kind of have an MOT of co-production. These are things for you to decide. And within that, you can then be thinking at your team level of, what are we doing that's working really well? What do we want to refresh? What do we think we want to get rid of, actually? And then at that bigger level, at the whole of Norfolk level, reminding yourself about what you've achieved too, because what we're really great at is telling ourselves how rubbish we are and what we didn't do well. And actually, probably incrementally, we're doing more all of the time. And rightly, our families, our young people should expect more of us. So they need to see that. But it's knowing that you've done something well. I think it leads you to the next stage of thinking, yeah, now we can tackle this, if that makes sense. So I think we want some of those individual service and strategic outcomes next week. Anyone else? Nicola?
I'm really interested, Nicola. I'm really interested in that sort of feedback loop at the bottom where parents and young people are able to see that their voices have been both heard, but also listened to and acted upon, so that that becomes a positive thing, encouraging that to go forward, and we don't just sort of stagnate because people lose the will to engage.
Yeah. So Nicola, it could be that I'm throwing out some ideas really, but based on what I think you're suggesting is what you want. It could be that we've got champions for co-production, and again, they can sit in any of our services, agencies. People are champions anyway without wanting the title. You know, there are some head teachers who are amongst us today, and we know they're here because there's so much going on for them, because they're totally committed to co-production values. So the values is fine, but then I think it's that how do we keep on ensuring it, really keep on making it work, and it is all anchored by that voice that we hear. So what mechanisms do we use to hear? And I'm thinking about what you've said about the local offer. You know, that at least annually we should obviously revise in law the local offer. But if we did it on a periodic basis where the champions came together every quarter, I don't know, every 3 months, and we refreshed a bit of you said, we did, or whatever works for Norfolk, then we know we've heard and what we've changed and begun to impact and influence. I'm just going to check out a couple of the boxes. I think John said, and John's raised this one, I think it's obviously part of your thinking and practice, John, about co-production for those who we often describe as harder to reach. And I've heard a teenage dad at a show start say to me, I'm not hard to reach, I'm just easy to ignore. And that really made me think, oh, I think you're onto something there. Yeah, I think you're being ignored and the system doesn't value you, system says. So that sort of making sure that when we get some of these new perhaps ways of working in place at the end, or commit to that at the end of session 4, that we don't forget that some people don't turn up, they don't want to come to meetings, they don't feel that it's for them, you know. And I'm from I was brought up in Toxteth in Liverpool, and certainly the people that I grew up with thought that school wasn't for them, you know, formal structures not for them. If you tried to do a person-centered review with flip charts, you'd be laughed out of the school. So there are some areas where we've got to think differently. And I think, was it Tracy said that Lewis wanted to have his review in a pub? We have to think differently, you know. If that's where someone feels more comfortable, when we can go to pubs, maybe that's where, and obviously I'd go to a quiet room in the pub, but the point is that we've got to, if we're saying we're person-centered, when working with those who feel more excluded, less that they're able to access, feel more marginal, we've got to do it in a different way, and we've got to hear what's comfortable for them. And Michael's saying that for those who recruit into our services, we need to ensure that engagement and co-production become part of job role descriptions as a default. Yeah, and you know, you could be thinking about the pledges as our sort of standards. The pledges could remain. You may feel, because they're several years old, that you're attracted to the inclusion indicators that we're going to look at, or the quality indicators. But again, that's for you. Oh, John's done a review around the pool table. It worked really well, and that was with a student who couldn't see. I think you're probably telling us there that you won because you had the advantage of vision, John. But maybe I'm wrong, and I'm just being I'm just being unfair to you. Oh no, you said you lost. no, I didn't not see that. Something came up on my screen and I couldn't see it properly. That's my excuse. Okay, any reflections? Because I realise I'm speaking too much in your reflection period. Two ears, one mouth. And it could be completely different to the things we've just talked about. It could just be something about a feeling, or, you know, what Amy made you feel that makes you think you're going to do something different, or how Jane made you recollect and think differently. Melanie's come into the chat box. In the early years, it's difficult for parents to vocalise the voice of their child, and it takes some drawing out. But once they realise it's of vital importance to informing their plan, for example, and for their ongoing transition, it's worth persevering with. Yeah. So listening harder, listening a bit longer. I think what a colleague of mine calls level 3 listening. You know, level 1 is you're telling me, but I'm thinking about what I'm doing for the tea or all the jobs I've got to do later. You get to level 3, we're really hearing what that person tells us, or we're seeing some observable behaviours that mean we know what they like and what they choose to do. Okay, well, I think we'll move on to slides, but I'm happy to, if I've missed anyone and I can't see you and you were waving, just shout out. And if not, we'll move on to making good on our pledges. So that's what I've called this session. And we'll move on to the first slide, if that's okay. So what I'm hoping is that I've got some feedback from you already. Thank you to those of you who sent information to Amy. And don't worry if you didn't, that's not meant to be a guilt trip. It's more of a name and a claim, because we know you're busy. And then we're going to spend some of our time taking your feedback. Some of you said that you'd like longer in breakout rooms. We will have longer together in groups today. And we want to look at the genuine partnerships contact standards or indicators for co-production. And again, what we're trying to work to then is this agreed set of principles, values, and that we refresh it so that we've got more of what Mark was describing as the tangible outcomes for the next steps and for the longer period in Norfolk. Okay, Amy? So I'm back to, you know, this is where it started in many ways. Co-production is the best, fairest and most effective way to achieve the SEND Code of Practice intentions. Children, young people and families must be placed at the centre of shaping the way services are planned and delivered in Norfolk. And that picks up, I think, on Nicola's point about, you know, if we tell you, it's really important to get the feedback about what difference that's made and how we've changed. And in answer to your own question in Norfolk, what is co-production? Your definition, we looked at definitions in week 1, is where everyone works together on an equal basis. So just thinking about John's concern about those who are marginalised, who don't quite fit into the offer that we often make at a more global level. How do we help those young people, families, children to develop and create a service or come to a decision that works best for them? So this is about strategic, shaping and commissioning services, or very individual, making the right decision about the next school placement, or about the kind of short breaks that I think is best for me if I'm 15 and I've got a voice alongside my parents. Okay, Amy? So just a few of some of the things you've said, because some of you put a lot of detail into the pledges. I'm really grateful for that, because we've got them. It's not that we're ignoring them, but I think a lot of you really did just go straight for it, really, and started to think about a joint participation strategy and action plan. This was I think one particular team wanting to have that approach where they had a work plan or an action plan for working with children, young people and families. So a clear commitment. I like the idea too of that toolbox of resources that can be picked off the shelf and used to encourage children with additional needs and their families to get involved and give their views. So, you know, that idea of great, we've got maybe lots of person-centered tools that we can use, that we put in one place. It could be that we put them on the local offer because we think everyone will be interested in them, if they're in a school, if they're a social worker, if they're a health practitioner working with families. And I've certainly been into a hospital, I think it was Leicester Royal Infirmary recently, where there was a very clear whiteboard at the back of a young person's bed that was very clearly explaining the communication approaches of this young person, the best way to support her in hospital and the way that she wanted to be treated. And it was just a really heartwarming reminder that, you know, in so many ways, these tools can be specific and helpful and make a transition or an experience like a hospital spell in hospital really much easier to manage, or slightly easier to manage. All of those things help. I love these. I'm definitely coming for these. I hope they happen in summer when we can maybe get together. Send family road shows, because again, Contact have got some brilliant materials now, for example, around preparing for adulthood, so that not only do young people prepare for adulthood, but their families often need to know, at least at 14, earlier if we can, what some of the possible options could be in order that we can think about supported internships or pathways to employment. Because if we don't know, we think the only route is one route, or a route that we've heard of from a neighbour. Youth forums, so we've got that voice of young people, and clearly we've got more young people at SEN support level in Norfolk and across the country. They're around more like 12.9% of our schools and college population. So that youth forum voice that will include those without plans but with some additional needs, really important. I think some of these are things that probably meant something to the person who wrote them, and they do to me too, but I might read them slightly differently. Communication is improved for young people and families. One of the great tools that lots of schools use now is Class Dojo, or they use a text messaging system. And that idea of, you know, we talked in the early session, remember with Amy, when she looked at the ladder of participation. There are some times when we just need that information. School's going to be closed because it's snowing today. That's information. We don't need to consult, but we might need to get back to you if we can't get to school, or collect our young person at the right time. But communication improves because there's much more of it sometimes, or there are systems that will support it. Communication's always going to be an issue, isn't it? You know, we always have this as an issue in any part of our lives, in our personal lives and our professional practice lives. So what does it mean then? Is this our view of what we think communication is like for young people and families? Are we going to listen to what they say, that what they tell us, that we want more from them to say, this is how it's best for you to communicate with me? There will be evidence. There is evidence from progress data. So we know from all kinds of data tableaus that are emerging now for local areas, the local authority interactive tool, the LGI information that we get from local government, the health information that our colleagues can collect, which I clearly know less about because I can't specify where that is, but I've started to work with some DCOs in the East Midlands just to think about the way that we can gather in one place some of those headline outcomes, so that we know how long might I wait for therapy for CAMHS in Norfolk, what's the average waiting time for speech and language therapy. Those things are process, I know, rather than progress. Alongside that, we need to capture some of those areas of individual progress. So I know GAS goals are often used for young people in speech and language therapy, and some of you will know more about that than I clearly do. But equally, what young people and families have told the SEN review is that they would like data to think more widely about wider outcomes. So I'm back to preparing for adulthood outcomes, that what often matters most to 14 to 25-year-olds when the preparation for adulthood PFA team survey them, top one is friends and relationships. And actually, if our parents aren't listening, the young people say sex and relationships. So, you know, these things matter to everybody. Why wouldn't they matter to young people with additional needs? They matter to all of us. So having friends, being able to measure that in some way, independence and enablement. I can see some things are coming through and I can't see them all currently. So if any of the other partners from Family Voice wants to chip in and just give me some of that feedback, really happy to. But again, what some of you want is feedback from parents, feedback from settings, and progress reviews. You know, we know that the annual reviews are focused now. There is some training that is rolling around the country from DFE partners and Andre Emick and others, and that annual focus on annual reviews, really using them in a much more meaningful way. And I have to tell you that I get really annoyed that when schools say to me, well, we can't spend 2 hours on an annual review that's person-centred. Again, I'm back to what's more important. Some schools have been saying to me, we can only spend half an hour, 45 minutes. It's that chance annually to capture and to give some feedback as well to the young person about what they've done really well and what some of their next steps in outcomes or targets will be. But also, it's that opportunity to refresh our outcomes thinking so that we can develop it further. But that progress review, the capturing of annual review information, if we do that differently, we've got methodologies like the IDOCS SEN Hub that begins to give us cohort level data, then we can start to say, to answer Nicola's question, yeah, what we found with young people in years 9, 10 and 11 with communication and interaction needs in Norfolk is that a lot of them want to learn how to cook because they want to be able to live independently in 5 or 10 years. So those things are the kind of things that we can start to find out more from and commission, and that we can commission them from voluntary sector partners, from groups of volunteers too, where that's the right thing to do. Okay, let's move on.
Pat, would you like an update on the chat?
I would, yes, I'd like an update on the chat, thank you.
Okay, so Jackie Millard says, my reflections so far really are about what co-production means, what it is and what it isn't, and how it feels for people. I learned so much when we ask families and young people for their views, many things that I would not think of, such as thinking about the colours we use and using lowercase letters. I think this is about communication particularly.
Yeah.
Hannah says, locally we use TOMS, therapy outcome measures for speech and language therapy goals. And Marcus says, a couple of years ago, a parent berated me about the frustrating bureaucracy in health and social care organisations that makes decision-making and change complex and slow. They said, what you need to understand is that you are the paid professionals who need to deal with the bureaucracy so that we, non-paid, lived experience contributors, do not have to. Reminded me of the parable of the blobs and squares, wise words that I have never forgotten.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad someone else had seen the blobs and the squares. It's just a brilliant video, and also just one that I watch every now and then just to have a word with myself, as they say in Liverpool, so that I don't start to use jargon. And speaking of jargon, I know we use it because it shortens time and means that we don't sort of take up too much space. But these, I wasn't really sure what FVA and Rovers annual reviews, though it sounds like it could be football. But if anyone wants to chip in on this, I didn't do this to sort of try to be negative, and I do apologise. I just started to put some of the first pledges in. So if anyone wants to come in on this, I'm not sure what it means. Now, I am the jargon queen, so I'm really gutted that I don't know these acronyms and jargon. But I do need to be reminded every now and then, and I'm sure we all do. What I love about this, though, if the person who developed this does or doesn't want to come in, whoops, can we go back? Is that all right, Amy? Is the day-to-day contact with families recorded? And I'm back to, again, Nicola's point about, if we hear, what do we do? So the idea of a chatterbox style repository, as it's called in Dudley. I've mentioned this, haven't I, the Dudley Chatterbox, where if I go out and do a piece of work from social care on the voice of young people about what they'd like to have available in terms of youth adventure playgrounds or activities in their area, then I put it into this repository which is a Dropbox, so they now call it Chatterbox, because I had a conversation with them to say repository obviously sounds like something else that's similar to it, that's medical, and they changed the word to Chatterbox. But then if I'm Michael or I'm Mark and I'm starting to look for information about what young people have told us in the last 2 years, because probably 3 years it's getting a bit out of date, in Norfolk, about their views about short breaks, about play, about activities that will just enable them to be in their community and make friends, I'm probably going to find some of what young people have said in the Chatterbox, and then I don't need to keep asking everyone all of the time. And I think John said something, but I can't see. Is this from your team, John, possibly?
I'm afraid it was, yeah. Because
it's not meant to be a name and shame. I do apologise. What are rovers?
Just records of visits, and it is yeah, a particularly awful term that is used. Yeah. So I'll do a glossary outside of this and send it to Amy.
Thank you. But within it, there's some lovely things. So, you know, record meetings and contacting your records of visits. So you've got that more up to date individual approach to young people that you work with, and you do share your reports with all parties. So what's not to like about that? But what we got from all of the pledges was a sense of, yeah, we are doing lots of things. But let's move on to the next slide, if that's okay, because what you were even bigger on, because I think you were inspired by Amy and by Jane, was what you were going to do. And I think some of this, Maxine, is from you. I got a real sense in the first session with Amy of how it sort of touched on all the things you believed in and galvanized you even further to think about your next steps.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, I've done some even more from that now. I joined a participation coffee morning that was being run last week. And really, it's inspired me to think much wider about how we can get everybody involved and working together.
Great. And what we've seen over a period of several years with Richmond and Kingston is that having young ambassadors, that's what Grace originally called them. And being if I was a Norfolk youth ambassador, for example, well, it's brilliant for my experience and for my CV when I get to that point. It could be part of a Duke of Edinburgh offer as well for young people with additional needs, and it gives you like a squad across Norfolk of young people that you could call on through social media, through emailing, or through any sort of I know that you've already got some mechanisms for youth voice, but it could give you that sort of fulcrum of more voices really within Norfolk. And that group in Richmond and Kingston have then begun to advise GPs about widget-friendly documents. There's all kinds of different written information in Richmond and Kingston. I used to be a deputy head there years ago as well, so it's an area I know quite well. We certainly didn't have information that was more accessible for more young people, and lots of the information now, particularly the health information, has completely been overhauled over a period of time. So that research and practice from them will be invaluable for you to make that connection, Maxine.
Yeah, thank you. And I've also got quite a lot of other links from that group last week. Is it Charlotte O'Halloran?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's her. She sent me some really good resources and different links. So I'm really beginning to sort of put the feelers out now to look at that good practice out there.
Great. And that's the thing, isn't it, that we've had a year of all of us feeling a bit more isolated, and bringing in new ideas. What fits in a metropolitan London borough won't necessarily fit you, but what you'll do is find parts of it that will work for you, and you'll build on what you already do really well and make it even more effective. Yeah. And then I love that collaboration, because what I got the sense of there was that you wanted, Maxine, to really know from families what the goal-based outcome measures could be. It was you, I think, still that one, wasn't it?
Yeah, I do. And actually, yeah, Yeah, definitely. My internet's a bit unstable this morning,
Oh.
but no, really want to make sure that we've got that standard and we've really worked together right from the beginning to do that.
Fab. Okay, what's the next one, please, Amy? So I think some of you then were thinking about a digital offer in response to COVID. And Amy, thank you. Amy, you will certainly know something about this, because I think you've already had a virtual offer, but you might not wish to speak about it now. So I do understand that if that's the case.
We've got a virtual offer in terms of we're running our youth forum virtually at the moment, and we're running our advice clinics virtually, but hopefully one day we'll be able to move them back to face-to-face for those that need it.
And certainly I know across the country there have been virtual therapeutic offers that have been, for some people, more successful than face-to-face, for others less so. There's a real variation. I know I do some one-to-one coaching through the screen, and in the main I'd say that's worked quite well from the recipient's point of view.
Sorry, Pat, I've just realised what you were asking me.
I was, and that's why I wasn't sure it was the right time or place.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So I was a bit flustered when I first joined the workshop this morning, because I'd just been supporting my daughter with her online therapy. So I've just realised what Pat was getting at. And it's going okay. She doesn't like it as much as she likes the face-to-face, I'll be honest. She finds it much more difficult to engage with. But it's better than not having anything at the moment when it's not possible to have face-to-face, and it's keeping her going. So, you know, yeah. It's a good thing. Apologies, Pat. I've just
don't worry,
got the wrong
Amy,
end of the stick.
I am aware that we're all working in our homes as well. So, you know, the fact that there's sensitivities around that was one that I was alive to. So thank you for your feedback. Student Council Youth Panel. So clearly lots of us are thinking this way. Parent Carer Termly School Forum with clinical and academic leads. Oh, I like that one. Who did that come from? Because I can't remember. I remembered Maxine's, but I can't remember where I found this one now.
Hi, I'm Pat. It's Beth from the Compass Schools. Yeah, so it's something that we've been doing termly with parents and carers. So yeah, both the clinical and academic leads kind of meet up and talk about their kind of views on school and children's views, and like think together what would be helpful going forward over like coffee and things like that, really. And then that's kind of fed back into how we work here too. So that's been a really nice setup.
Sounds really good. And again, when you can drop in and speak to someone from a clinical or practice background, it feels a bit less threatening, a bit less intimidating. And then once you've done that, then maybe I can come for a more formal session as a parent or carer. Sounds good. And also I like this thinking about travel costs, because I was up with a real dilemma with working with parents and carers and young people who are volunteers, and we're in a meeting together as we are today, and I'm getting paid for it, and the other person that's giving their time isn't. And the dilemma is this, that, you know, sometimes when you come as a volunteer, there's a real powerful impact of that because you're giving your time freely. But sometimes when you feel, often when an area's got written statement of action, actually, when you're being asked to come to a lot of meetings that will benefit the system, it can also feel a little bit unfair, and some acknowledgement. Sometimes the idea of paying travel costs in a big geographically dispersed county like your own, or the vouchers that I know Amy made sure that Amy Pease here made sure that Amy from Flare received something as a gift and acknowledgement of her time. All of these things are important because they're about us valuing the time and the contribution. So, you know, often our PCFs have got a really clear methodology about costs. There's going to be a noise in a moment. The dog's going to bark. Yeah, the doorbell's rung. Sorry, I'm hoping someone will pick that up, not me. So the idea that we've got a process and that we're respectful of time, and again, some areas say, I'm looking at Julie from Contact, we work with family friendly hours, you know, that we we run sessions from 10 till 2, because if not, our parents can't be there, or we run them in that time, but then we run them in the evenings or on a Saturday too, because working parents can't get to those sessions. So we've got to have an approach that will make co-production easier for everybody. And I know I've done quite a lot of evening meetings recently with some parents I've been working with in a different part of the country. And I have to say, I felt quite tired, but then I thought, that's their life. That's their life all the time, because they've been running around with work, with children, homeschooling, and then they've come to this meeting in the evening. So, you know, it's just being in the other shoes sometimes, isn't it? It just really does make us all, I think, have a degree of humility about co-production, and it makes that equality that you talked about in the pledges a bit more pertinent and visible. Using language which is accessible to children and families, that's you, the person who put this in, you might also find that connection with Grace in Richmond and Kingston and with Maxine's work really beneficial, because I think, again, we want everyone to be thinking a bit similarly and doing some similar things, because then our families will feel that, you know, oh, do you know what, I actually understand that more now. In Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, where I live, LLR, we've got care navigators, and there are only 3 of them, but their role across the 3 local areas is, as health practitioners, to convey information from different health practitioners across, or clinicians across the system, because some of that information can be quite complex. You know, it's a medical explanation quite often of a condition or need, and the navigator, as well as supporting families, the role is to support through the transition from children's to adult services, so they start attending your annual reviews from year 9. I think it's brilliant. It's one of the most powerful things that I've seen, and it costs the salary of 3 people, so it's not a massive cost, but it's a really strong way of giving that access to letters, reports and information. So that is verbal, and especially in some parts of that particular footprint for the CCG, there are people who don't speak English as a first language, so it's really helpful to them too. And some of you are thinking about service description leaflet, which is developed with our families in Norfolk. So again, that will probably look different, it will sound different, and it will be more accessible. So nice one, whoever came up with that action. Okay, are we on to our next slide? And again, this is that kind of language, I like it, of collaboration. You know, that way we design and develop different care plans, better, hopefully more effective care plans, and thinking about a redesign. It sounds like this team are up for a bit, or this person's up for a bit of a redesign with goal-based outcome measures too. It will be great when we think about person-centered good conversations next week to think about active participation in reviews or in plans or care assessments, in all of those decisions about me. Feedback collected. I must admit, I love reports when, you know, they've got lots of numbers or data in, but they've got those speech bubbles in that just tell me what someone really has said. So it's a direct quote of what someone in Norfolk has told us very recently. That's always perfect, I think. Regular communication. So what's regular to you and what's regular to me? And I sound like I could be a tribunal judge now. I don't want specificity, but we know, for example, in chapter 6 of the Code of Practice, that schools have got a duty, if I'm at SEN support level, to hold a termly meeting with families. Not everywhere does that necessarily. Not every school offers that face-to-face. Some families prefer it by, again, in the evening, because both parents are working, and the young person's in a mainstream school but has SEN support needs. So that they would say, well, yeah, let's have an online meeting in the evening. But what does regular mean is the point. Because what I might need when my child goes through a transition, or I go through a transition, is a bit more communication. And then when we've got through that period, when I've gone from year 6 to year 7, or I've gone from a school, special school setting to an FE college, I just might need to be touching base with you every day, but after 3 weeks of text messaging, I don't need to keep, drawing on the service. So I just bring that to mind, really, that regular communication does mean different things. And someone I think commented on bureaucracy earlier. I could just see the start of it because I can see the slides and not the text box in presenting. And what I think about that area, I've lost my thread now because I distracted myself. Regular communication, it's gone. Someone might remind me later of what they think I was saying. You can see it's live anyway. That's the upside. You can see it's not a pre-recorded session from me. I'll come back to that if it comes back to me. Regular communication with parents to discuss therapeutic and educational progress. Okay, let's reflect on regular. Let's move on, Amy. I think this is one of the last ones because I've really not picked up all of the things that you've said. I've just tried to get a feel for what you're saying, what you're thinking. Always asking for the voice of the child, collaborative working within the team. I love that because again, we don't always share information. I see some schools that I've been into where they'll write on a whiteboard about something great that's happened with someone today, or lots of special mentions, and that means then that when other people who bump into that child on the corridor can start a conversation. It's that kind of thing, isn't it, really? Or being able to get a text message home to say, ask Pat about what happened in food technology today, and then parents, family members know that we can start to ask about it or be shown something if that's the way that I communicate. Plan, do, review. Signposting, often underestimated, but that's about us knowing the local offer as well, isn't it? We need to know. So just when did you last look at your local offer? And I say that because I've been in that position myself where I've thought, what, I've not looked at the local offer in the area I used to work in for a few months. And then more disappointingly is if I look and it's not all on there, or there's been no change. So signposting, and it's not all about what's on the local offer. It's about what we know and who we know as well, isn't it? And how we can put people in touch with the right availability of interest for them. Working with Vision Norfolk, attending parents' forums. Transition, yeah, that's a biggie, really. We could almost do a session on transition as a separate co-production agenda, couldn't we? Because it's transition that makes change happen as well. It's scary, but it can be the thing that makes us develop and really change, go on to the next level for us. Applying for and supporting applications for EHC plans. If the person chooses to, I wonder, is that from the family point of view or is that from the school point of view? And supporting the review process. You might not remember that you sent this in. No comers? Okay. A flexible approach, always good. So that includes remote meetings and recommendations and resources to benefit the home setting. Again, that's a really interesting one in this era of blended approaches to learning and development, of being at home more. Even being able to see someone's room and make some suggestions to change can be helpful. If I know that there's a team in Northamptonshire based in children's social care, and when you get a diagnosis of autism or autism spectrum condition, then that team come out to kind of look at what would benefit home. And they're thinking about, obviously, the physical environment in many ways, but they're also thinking about the way that everything works for the whole family. So it's a really interesting approach, because that ability to change things at home, where we do spend 90% of our time if we're at school. School is only 10%, 38 weeks, 25 hours a week when it's in normal times. So actually there could be an argument, could there not, that most of our EHC plan or our care assessment plan needs to be focused on home. I'm just being, I could be contentious in that, and I'm not trying to be, but I'm just trying to help us reflect that where I live most of my life isn't in school. Where I live most of my life is out of school. So if our plans are not looking at that 24/7, and that was the whole point, I think, of personalisation and of section J of the planned personal budgets. It wasn't about, you know, let's try and load more financial resource into a plan, because we know that just about, I think there are only 10 local authorities in the country that are not overspent on the high needs block. But the point is that some of those small things I mentioned in session 1 about the childcare and travel arrangements in Nottinghamshire, where there was a big saving to the authority. I know I worked with a young person nearly 10 years ago now, in the Pathfinder era in Leicester City. So he was in year 8 then, and I've been able to find out where he is now, and he is in a job. But in 1 year, he had an EHC plan, and he did have autism spectrum condition. And things were beginning to break down. So the family were looking at early help and support, because he had a younger sister. She'd been referred to CAMS. A lot of it was because of the way the whole sort of family scenario was affected by his behaviours, his needs, his barriers to communication and understanding. But he was able to access mainstream school. And in this summer where we worked together, though we did replicate it for the summers going forward, small things made a difference, and we spent no more than £800. The family had a week's holiday at a caravan that we'd purchased that Leicester City owned in a nearby East Midlands county. They were able to get there themselves, so we already had that capital cost and we'd paid for it. There was a befriender, so there was a befriender system in Leicester where we were able to identify a volunteer who'd been DBS checked and who came to meet with this young man. I'll call him Jay, not his real name. And he realised that Jay had a real interest in music. So he started to take him to a local music shop on a Saturday. Within 2 years or a year and a half, he didn't need to take him to the music shop, because by then he was 14, 15, and he could get there himself. It was walking distance from home. They knew him in the shop, and he spent literally hours reading sheet music. He'd learned to read music. He taught himself. But all of these small things began to change in a really positive way what was going on in that family. So that had an impact on his learning. The reason we put some resource in initially was because when we used to measure with national curriculum levels, progress in sub-levels, every time he came back in September, he'd had a plan since he was in year 4, he'd dropped 2 or 3 sub-levels or a whole national curriculum level in core subjects. When we put these things in place in the summer, he maintained his academic progress. We didn't do anything different academically over the summer, but things changed, and he did leave school with 6 GCSEs, and he did go on to an FE college and then a supported internship. So, you know, those small things made a difference. So when we talk about benefit in the home, some of those things need to be us thinking creatively and differently, and that's part of the challenge of co-production. When we listen differently, we can't keep on doing more of the same, because more of the same isn't going to make a difference. Generally, it's going to keep us where we are with a large expenditure and outcomes that lead to only 6% or 5.8% to be accurate of our young people with additional needs getting into employment. So anyway, I've gone off on one there. I'm going to move on, Amy, onto the next slide. So we're going to be doing some work together soon, and I wanted to just take us back to the quality standards that I shared with you, and what you've had sent out to you today are the quality indicators or standards that Genuine Partnerships. So this is a PCF in Rotherham, a parent and carer forum, that got to know each other some years ago, but they've built and grown over time. They've got over 450 members now. They're quite a small borough, but that 450 are quite active. So that's probably a bit different to lots of areas. And over time, their story is remarkable. If you go onto their website, some of the parents there describe, I'm sure some of our Family Voice members know this feeling too well, you know, that tiredness that they feel about feeling that they've got to go in to not battle, but to offer a different take on things than practitioners or schools have given to them. And that they started with the Rotherham Charter, working with schools from a Brian Lamb project that they were funded through the Lamb Inquiry for. And they've evolved over time like we do. And they've developed these 4 standards, which they feel really do help us to build trust. And it's when we are in that state of trust that we can genuinely be equal and take forward our co-production ambitions. So I like them because they're quite succinct, but your pledges too have got that value-laden attribute to them. Welcome and care, you know, so that we don't pitch up at school. And I think when we saw Jane Friswell last week, you know, Jane had that experience of, and I don't think she mentioned it, she rang into school fairly regularly for some periods because Harry had 17 weeks of fixed term exclusions in years 10 and 11, which was really, really difficult for him and for Jane and the family. And when Jane rang up, the receptionist would go, and Jane said, on about the 5th occasion, before you cross me over to the Senko, can I just have a word with you, Mrs. X? And I'm not, you know, I don't know whether you know, but whenever I call you and say my name, I get you do actually sigh, or there's an exhalation of breath, or inhalation maybe. And this receptionist just hadn't thought about it, just didn't seem to be aware that that was part of, I mean, obviously now lots of our apprenticeship receptionists, I've seen lots of apprentices who've become receptionists or school admin staff, and they're working to customer care standards, so they tend to be a bit more aware of it. But, you know, all of those messages, or the head who says to a parent, oh, well, we haven't had a child like him before. I mean, it's a bit, you know, they wouldn't say, oh, I haven't had a girl who's as female as you before, Pat, or I haven't had a child who's as black as you. We would not say that about race or gender, or I hope we wouldn't. Why is it okay to say it about disability? It just isn't. I can see Nicola's nodding, so do come in if you want to.
No, I just agree, and sometimes it's people who really mean well that are the most difficult to get on side. I remember a receptionist telling me that she had explained to her children who were going to be in the same class as my daughter that not everyone was as lucky as they were. And I you know, didn't know what to say. I said, oh, we don't think about it quite like that.
Yeah.
But she thought she was being good, you know, and it was hard.
Yeah, and I think in the olden days for me, people said about my brother that he suffered from Down syndrome. And I said, no, he doesn't suffer. He's one of the happiest people I know. But it was that kind of, you know, and they were probably quite pleased because of when Tony and I were born that they weren't using a more pejorative word than Down syndrome. So it's well intended, but it's treating me as other. It's often described as othering, isn't it? You know, and actually I'm just me. And even when I talk about additional needs, I've got some confliction with that really, because if we label, then we diminish, you know, and that's the dilemma of diagnoses is important, but medical model approaches to what I can't do just puts a real limit on what I'm able to do. So welcome and care, you know, people are sometimes really quite, I don't know, really positively pleased when you just welcome them, make them, you've read something about them, you use their name, and you offer them a cup of tea and a biscuit. And it's like, you know, Oh, I've just relaxed. These are things that are just right at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of need, aren't they? They are so simple. They are about being human. I went to a school in Hertfordshire some years ago on a really hot day, and I travelled from where I live in Leicestershire, and they didn't even offer me a glass of water, and I was really so thirsty. And some of those very basic things, they're just about being human. But when you get into the standards, there's a bit more of what we, you know, what that means for families in the situation that we are describing today. Value and include, communicate and work in partnership. And we're going to be looking at this a little bit more in our working groups, but let's move on, Amy, to the next slide, please. So welcome and care, and they've got these quite sort of, you know, distinctly set out. Provide a happy and secure environment or context. If you're a school member of staff, if you're a school leader who's on this session today, you know that often when families come in, they just want to know, right, he can't run away from here. I'm having a look around at all the fencing. He's not going to be in any danger. And, you know, safeguarding and safety are, again, right at that base of the universal Maslow's hierarchy of need. But guess what? I want to be happy. I quite liked it when we used to be able to enjoy and achieve. I don't just want to make educational progress. I quite like to have a good life, thanks. And so I know that I can't guarantee that you're happy with the session now. I might be aiming more at contentment. You can't be happy all of the time, but we're trying to make it positive, and what that means for me is positive. And if I was back in a school setting, which I'm from originally, I love the skillsbuilder.org universal framework, because they describe resilience and positive, what do they call it? They call it feeling positive, because they think it's more understandable to children and young people. And so for very young children, there are badges that I can get for the 16 areas of happiness or, you know, feeling positive that I can develop. And so there are things in school that we can do, and we can have conversations at home. But when you go into a school, or when you meet a social worker who comes into your home, when you go into a clinician's medical room, you get the feel, don't you? Some people get that culture right. They make you feel relaxed. They've created an environment that will enable you to feel secure, or they come to your place where they know that you're going to feel more of that security. So these sound like small things, but this is that, well, if I'm more happy having an annual review with John over the pool table and beating him despite my visual impairment, then great. That's a really brilliant welcome and care. Making sure your voice is heard and valued. Responding with sensitivity. You know, I did listen, and I can hear sometimes a very early review when I was only in my late 20s myself. A parent received some news from another practitioner, from an educational psychologist in the meeting, and the parent jumped on my knee and sat on my knee, and I was younger than the parent. It really was a surprise, if I put it that way. But actually, she had some needs of her own. We've all got our own needs, and if I was getting some bad news, I'd want some emotional support. I was surprised by her sitting on my knee, but I hope I responded with sensitivity, because she just needed me to put my arm around her, really. She just needed comfort at that time. So responding with sensitivity, obviously COVID friendly in these days, but you know, I wouldn't have pushed her away if she jumped on my knee now because of COVID, because her need was such that she just needed a human response. Communicating expectations clearly. Again, you know, that will, we can't do that. Or for the first 2 weeks, I will be able to text you every day or phone you every day. But then let's review it at the end of that, because I might not be able to do it every day when we've got other new starters coming in, that kind of thing. Emphasising strengths and achievements. If we don't keep on reminding our young people of what they can do well, and I don't mean that fluffy You know, there's a lot of criticism of young people about being snowflakes, and I don't think they are. I'll tell you what, I think young people are remarkable, and we learn from them every time we work with them, as we did with Amy in session 1. But people do need to know what they're doing well, both you as practitioners, me as a practitioner, but we need to know what we do next. But knowing what we do well, recognising our achievements in a review or a meeting is really important. Okay, let's move on. So welcome and care, standard 1 or quality indicator 1. And the second one is value and include. So again, what Rotherham have found works, and they've again taken all sorts of views and really tried to distill this, is identifying needs early. Well, funnily enough, that is a requirement in law, in the Code of Practice. But it's also what we know works well, that if we identify early and we can involve you at every stage, then again, you're not feeling done to as an individual. And it's not a big problem. So if I'm 5 and we've begun to identify that I've got some different needs to my peer group, knowing that early on is really helpful, and trying to sort of keep it as universal early on is often helpful too. And what I mean by that is having a very clear graduated response in early years settings, in nurseries and in schools, so that we've got that ability to identify need and to give the right support in a timely way. A can-do approach, well, who doesn't like that? But what parents are saying, I think, and families are saying, is that they want to feel that that it's not all doom and gloom, that we're not saying that, you know, Tony, my brother, suffers from Down syndrome. We're saying that, you know, what we've discovered is that he's got a real ability to read whole words. He doesn't respond quite in the same way with phonics, but he's brilliant at whole word recognition. And that's going to be the way to continue to develop his reading skills, his literacy skills. Make sure that all practitioners have the right skills and understanding. So that is about values, I think, and that is about culture. So in our systems, in our schools, in our FE colleges, in our social care teams, in our health care practices, what does that mean? And we might need to find out by listening differently to young people. And again, there's a key working pilot going on currently around young people with LD and autism that NHS England are running. And what we know is that at the heart of what they're trying to find out is what young people think works about avoiding hospital admission to tier 4, and what works for them when they step down from that support. Information about strengths and needs sensitively shared. So because I give information to Maxine's team, she's got to be clear. I think generally with GDPR, there's a much stronger professional practice. It's always been strong in health. One of the issues though is about being able to share it too. So some areas have got around that sharing through things like the wiki, which I think you've seen, the RICS wiki. And I don't know if I've mentioned this, but if you Google Shane's wiki, it's a multimedia way of sharing information. So the Greenwich Pathfinder piloted it with the RICS Centre at the University of East London. And what that means is not everyone might see my plan, but for those people that I give permission to, or Shane does, you can access my wiki or parts of it. And the wiki might then, one of the things I remember seeing on Shane's wiki that was really powerful was his physiotherapist gave his physio report verbally in about 3 minutes. But within that report, as we heard her voice, it then looked at Shane in different sessions being filmed. And what that meant was everyone who worked with Shane, if they gave some support for his short breaks, or a family member who might take him out for a day's activity, we knew about some of the best ways of supporting his physical needs, which were for him fairly significant. So that I didn't need to know about his plan, but the information was shared. So again, we've got to be creative about what that could mean for us in Norfolk. And involving all relevant partners in decision-making process about referrals to others. So that's quite important. That's come from families saying, remember, you know, that we're at the heart of what that process should be about, that we make those decisions, no decision about me without me. And really encouraging all partners to contribute to the development of values, systems and policies, because there is that saying from McKinsey that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So we need systems, but we do need the values, the culture to work well in Norfolk to get what we want from co-production. Okay, let's move on to value 3, or to standard 3. Communication. This is the classic one, because again, if I'm working with a group of Senkos, I work with Senko Network in Leicestershire, where there are about 380 schools, and we run 7 sessions a term. And they too are busy people. They're parents, they're workers, they're partners. And one or two of them, not just one of them, will also say, but I could be available 24/7. You know, I've got 250 children and young people in a secondary school on my SEN register. So I need some boundaries too. And so one of the two of the secondary Senkos particularly that I work with will say, I will email you as a parent on a Thursday night, you know, between 6 and 8. I'm definitely going to be online then. So if you wanted to ask any questions, that's the time to catch me. But they don't want to be emailing to families every night at 8 o'clock. So communication is clearly about systems that work for all parties. So we're not saying that our teams should be available 24/7, but we are maybe saying, actually, if families are saying that we want these things in Norfolk, this is one of the purposes of the local offer, decommission to recommission. If we need something at the weekend, maybe we need something at the weekend. So this is sort of both simple and everyday, but also really quite a major area of what communication means when we really clearly and honestly ask for views and involvement. Because I remember my dad saying to me years ago, don't ask a question that you don't want to know the answer to. And in so many ways, it's that, isn't it? If I ask Nicola, well, what's going to be really good for you? And she says, I would love on a Saturday morning to have this, that, or the other, you know, a swimming pool session that's available where I don't need to go because I hate swimming, but my daughter can go to. Well, if I've asked, and that's what you want, I maybe have got a duty then to try and help you to find that. It might not be that I would do it because I'm a lousy swimmer, Nicola, but it could be that, again, we work with my friend Barry Jones. He is a channel swimmer, and he works with young people with additional needs, coaching them to swim in the open air. It's something he does as a volunteer. And if I knew that his matched your need, then that's what signposting is as well. It's not just about systems and what we offer as services. It's about that ordinary life and 24/7 availability. So communicate. I'm not doing a good example of communicate, but listening calmly and respectfully. We'll focus a bit more on some of those processes in the good conversation session next week. Responding promptly. Nicola, I can't tell you today, but I'll be in touch with you by the end of this week, if it's a Tuesday or whatever it might be. And striving to use positive and constructive language. That a lot of schools are moving towards a rights-based curriculum, and there are 16 human rights, one of which, of course, is the right to an education. And they're finding that really quite helpful to think about all sorts of restorative justice and practices with and between pupils and children themselves, but also in developing that very respectful, constructive language approach. So if you want to know more about that human rights based, there's a great speaker as well, Sanchita Hosali, who is the chief exec of the British Institute of Human Rights, who certainly worked with lots of areas on what that means for areas and schools. Okay, let's move on to quality indicator 4, the last one. Working in partnership. This one sounds simpler, but it's participation. It's being an equal partner. Lots of things that we've already picked up on in the first 2 sessions, really valuing the contribution of the other partner. I've always encouraged families to submit some information to annual reviews, because if not, it's like what we're saying, well, actually we want the class teacher's report or the form tutor's report. We'd like something from the OT or the physio. Well, what about families? Because again, you know, we could be reporting on things as a family member, like when we went on holiday, you know, for the first time ever, we were able to eat out comfortably and in a way that made all of the family feel quite relaxed, because of some of the work we've done on social stories and social skills, whatever it could be. We're an equal partner, and our contribution can be valued in all sorts of ways. Working together, this is very much that family view about let's develop some of those plans and the outcomes within plans together, because again, we want the whole approach to be, particularly if it's a focus on communication or social skills, you know, you're going to be able to practice them out in the home environment so much more, or in the social environment when it opens up more to us. And also obviously involving everyone in decisions about organisational development and improvement. So they're the 4 standards, and let's move on to the next slide. I'm not going to read this out, don't worry. In what you've got, what you've received, you've seen that I was thinking about Mark's point early in the session. So when we look at welcome and care, what does it mean then? You know, can we break it down? This is an example. This doesn't mean you've got to do it this way in Norfolk. This is how it's worked for Rotherham and with other areas that they've worked with since. So they're just explaining that partner means in equal measure a child or young person, their parents, and they're big on describing all of us as practitioners if we're not a family member or, a person with a lived experience in Rotherham. And when I go to their events, they ask you to remove your lanyard, because there's something about an equal status. And these might sound like little things, but you know, am I turning up with a badge on and feeling more important than you? Or are we all here because we want something, an endeavour that's going to change things in Norfolk? Organisation is any one of us really who runs a service or makes an offer. And safety and obviously well-being, safeguarding underpins the 4 cornerstones. So I'm not going to labour these, but the idea is that we start to map what we mean. We could do this with the pledges, as we did on those early slides that some of you did complete, and we can look at evidence, we can look at actions. Let's move on, Amy. Again, I'll move on. These are just some of the indicators: providing a happy and secure environment. And then within the welcome and care, nurturing confidence, well-being and self-esteem. That's a different sub-level of activity. It's about commitment to everyone's emotional health and well-being, a really timely focal point at this moment in time in all of our lives. But again, the indicators then that the families might expect to see are described here. So we've got these standards that we can use as a reference point as we move into groups. Let's move on, Amy. And I put the contact in for Genuine Partnerships because I've used so much of their work. I felt that it was rude not to, really, just so that you know that they are a brilliant group of people and they've got some fabulous resources to work with. Let's move on again. So we're going to go into group work now. We've got 45 minutes of the session available to us, and I've suggested that we have about 30 minutes. So we might want a 5-minute comfort break, and then we're moving into groups. And Amy's assigned us into 5 groups because that's what we've been throughout. So apologies, I was thinking of 4 standards, 4 groups, but we've got 5, and we're going to be able to look at the standards if you've got them available to you, because we sent them out. I wasn't able to put them all on slides, sorry. Do the standards enable the implementation of the Norfolk pledges? Or do they need to be standalone? Because what I'm not trying to do is impose another way of working on you. You've got a framework already, but in our group, can we think about specific aspects of the standards that could help us with our own service standards, with our SEF, our self-evaluation framework, and we've got a particular theme for each of the groups. Nominate a spokesperson. It could be the person who leads the group, but it might be someone else who naturally is really wanting to speak. Nominate a spokesperson to feedback several of the key issues and considerations. So we take a 5-minute break. We'll join our groups within 5 minutes, and then we'll be back at about 10 to 12 together, just to get a few of those key issues. But I can see from the chat that Mark, I think you've said something, so just wanted to give you the chance to chip in. You were saying something about the standards, I think.
Yeah, well, I've just been sort of obviously listening to you, but also was having a little scroll through because we got it sent through, was it a couple of days ago, and I just find it really helpful to have it in that type of framework, because it helps you to sort of really be clear about what you're looking at and about whether we can really provide some clarity and evidence of how we move it forward. So looking at where we are already, and then how we can actually start to progress and develop into much more cohesive way. So I really like it, actually, and I think it's something we need.
Yeah. So it could be that individual teams, services think these would be a tangible tool to use. They don't stop us still having the pledges. What they would do would give us information that provides evidence about how the pledges are being implemented in Norfolk, and what the next actions of different parties would be, because it's a big topic, isn't it? Co-production. It's everybody's business, wherever we work, but it will mean something slightly different to each of us, even on this call today, let alone our partners and other practitioners who are not in these sessions today, but a part of the Norfolk offer. Okay, let's go into groups. Take a short comfort break, grab a drink, or pop to the loo if you need to, and then be back as a whole group at 10 to 12, if that's okay. As a spokesperson.
I think that was me. I think we were room 2. I don't know. I
think it was you, Amy, too.
Got in a bit of a muddle trying to get everyone into the right rooms. So we had a really good conversation. I'm not sure we focused entirely on our set task, but we had good conversations anyway. And one of the key things that came out of it again was time, and that time is needed to make sure any kind of co-production is done properly and effectively, and that it can't just happen overnight. We talked about the need to build up the trust of the families and the young people, so that they understand that when they do talk to us, we do listen and we move forward with their thoughts and their ideas. And that, again, that's going to take time. We can't suddenly say to them, right, this is what we're going to do, and they won't necessarily accept that immediately, that's going to be happening straight away. We need to build that trust with them. And then we were talking about some of the things that might be useful to support those, and we talked about having things like good practical examples of co-production that we can draw on, and we talked about those possibly going into the toolbox. We talked about not just relying on existing forums or the new youth forum, but actually consulting with people that we're already working with and having tools and resources to support us to do that effectively. And we touched again on some of the challenges when parents and the young person might not agree, and their views might be very different, and the challenges that can present, and looking at having supportive resources on how to manage that effectively. And we talked about sometimes it can be really tricky because we work in quite a siloed way across the system, so that can provide some barriers to co-production. And I think we had some connectivity issues, but I think I've covered most of the things that our group talked about. If anyone in the group wants to chip in, feel free.
Thank you, Amy. I am going to move on because of time to room 3. Was that you, Nicola? No?
No, that was me, Pat. Unfortunately, I got moved.
Sorry, Rachel.
That's all right. I did get moved to group 3, and I do apologise because we didn't have all the information that we wanted initially, but we ended up talking about the importance of understanding each other's roles when we're working together, and coming up with a common agreement and really understanding what that means to each and everyone involved. We talked about revisiting anything that's worked on really regularly to make sure that it's where it needs to be and we'd like it to be, and that we need to check in with young people. We talk quite a lot about how information can be gleaned from young people within schools, and there was a lady in my group who spoke a lot about what they can get, and actually as we came towards the end of our session, we were sort of talking about how useful that wiki example would be that you gave, particularly for the young people for whom you know, taking part in a forum would be very difficult for communication reasons, for lack of confidence, for whatever that might be. Having all that information available on a format that is owned by them could be really beneficial.
Great, thank you. And rule 4?
So we were talking about involving you in decisions about organisational changes and improvements, and we acknowledged that organisation was a huge systems that nobody really understands, and certainly people on the ground don't understand, and why should they? But we came back to the same point that room 2 did, that it's about time, resources, and using the knowledge we have, making good use of other people's knowledge, but acknowledging that there's a lot of expertise in Norfolk.
There is.
But we have to listen to the right people and use that knowledge, and that in some ways empowering practitioners to do what they know is right is a very, very valuable thing. We wanted to, but time really was the key point, that this is not something that we can fix in the next couple of months. Indeed, the next few months present some particular challenges for everybody that we really need to think carefully about. But this is something that is a 5-year program or something like that. It's huge. It's, if we don't do it, we do it properly. That was our feeling.
Great, thank you. Is it you, Julie, next? No?
Be Natasha.
Oh, sorry, Natasha. I can't see you at the moment.
I'm talking on behalf of Natasha because Natasha's voice is not as strong as it would be, as she would like. So she's delegated. We focused really on the element of participation and whether participation was effective and whether it was having the right impact on what we're doing. And I think the phrase that was mentioned earlier, the not difficult to reach but easy to ignore, had impacted quite heavily on everybody's response, on everybody's thinking this morning. So we had reflections from different groups, and I think those people who are working in schools with one-to-one, so we had some really good contributions from the virtual school for sensory support, and they feel that they work one-to-one with the children and participate with work with children, and so they sometimes hear the voices of the child and young person perhaps more clearly than some of the rest of us. Often it's easy to hear the voices of parents and carers and professionals, and are we really gaining the input and the thoughts of the children and young people as well as we might want to, and so that they really can play an active part in their own futures and in what's happening to them. And what we also covered was the fact that it's really important not just to get the participation, but to reflect on that participation, feedback, and how that feedback is going to shape what happens next, so that people engage more effectively. There was a lot of realization that informal feedback can often be more truthful and more effective than the formal feedback that we seek, because we identify those people and we go to those people. We probably need a wider group in order to be able to get truthful feedback. And if people feel that what they're saying is being listened to and then acted upon and put into practice, then maybe the feedback and the involvement and participation will be better.
I think you're right, Jessica. Because of time, I feel like I'm being really rude because I'm not modelling what we're talking about, which is good listening and a feedback loop, really. But I'm just aware that I need to bring in one more group. So if that's all right with you, I'm going to move to Michael, who I think is the last contributor of the 5 groups today, please.
Yeah, just very briefly, the majority of our conversation was around the framework that had been shared around this morning, and I think the consensus was that it's a good practice exemplar. So why not adopt and adapt it? But definitely adapt, not just take it wholesale. And particularly, I'm struck by it's been mentioned a few times, particularly by Pat, that we need to think about co-production at the individual, the service and the strategic level. Those of you that know me, I can't stop thinking strategic. That's a big part of what I'm doing at the moment, big stuff across the county. But that framework to me looks like it can be adapted as easily for a practitioner that's doing one-to-one work or someone that's heading up maybe quite a large set series of teams. So we want to adopt, we want to adapt. I think it leads on nicely to where Amy's been thinking around a toolkit for some time, something that we can grab at the end of this and make sure we embed. And there'll be some very, very practical touch points throughout each year, whether it's the Send Family Road shows, the professional forums, but other just ad hoc interactions where we can gather that information and do something with it. Definitely not dusty shelf approach. So yeah, I think there's a real practical solution, practical application that we can use.
So thank you everyone for sending us information about pledges. Do send more if you want to, for your participation today, the feedback that you've given to us, time, listening and then doing is a really key point that's come through, and maybe using the quality indicators as a tool wherever we work or wherever we live and do in Norfolk. But if I do that on my own, if I did it back in school when I used to be a head teacher and don't do it with the families and the young people that I work for as well as with, then I'm marking my own homework. But what it could do is give us that way of bringing the pledges to life in the doing, in the work that we all do, to build or refresh that culture of co-production. So when we meet next week, we want to focus a bit on good conversations, what they look like at an individual level, and then also think about some of the things that we're committed to, which might be, Michael, I know, was quite minded to think about, co-production week, where we can take stock and have a bit of an annual focus, MOT, on what we're doing well and things we want to do even better. We could think about a space on the local offer. And yeah, it's not next week, it's the 9th of Feb, sorry. Next-ish week, the 9th of February, our final session together. And I'm not going anywhere. So I'd like to stay in touch with Norfolk about things that will develop going forward. It is a 5-year project. It isn't all going to change overnight, but we can begin to get that sense of momentum because of how many of you are committed to it and have pitched up for 3 weeks, and we'll be coming back on the 9th of Feb, I hope, for the final session. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of week, and we look forward to seeing you on the 9th. Thanks for your participation and your support.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you again, Pat. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.